The year was 1998, and you had one of the most loaded draft classes in probably all of the 90s coming out, man, and teams were lined up to see which player could turn their franchise around. At the top of the list, you had the Indianapolis Colts with the #1 pick overall in the 98 draft. At number 2, you had the Arizona Cardinals. Who are they going to go with? At 3, you had the San Diego Chargers. Then you had the Oakland Raiders and the Chicago Bears rounding out the top 5 picks. And there was plenty of talent to choose from. The reigning Heisman winner, the first ever to this day defensive Heisman winner, you had in Charles Woodson, man, the true playmaker, the guy who could make all the plays on defense, the guy who could make some plays even on the offensive side of the ball, the guy that did everything for the Michigan Wolverines. He was available, he was ready to rock, but where was he going to land heading into the NFL draft? Of course, you had the glamour position, right? The quarterback position. Who was going to go first? You had Peyton Manning out of Tennessee, the senior, the guy who came back for one more season. He had the leadership. He had the quick throwing motion. He was accurate with the football. He was decisive. He was known for being in the film room, watching film 24/7. They even called him the caveman, right? You had him coming out. But on the other side, you had the glamour kid, Ryan Leaf, out of Washington State. Only playing 2 seasons, but man, were those 2 seasons incredible. In his last season, throwing 33 touchdowns, leading Washington State to their first Rose Bowl in a very long time. This kid has it all in terms of the potential, right? He's standing 6'5", 245, incredible size now, definitely incredible size back in 1998 at the quarterback position. This guy could throw the ball 70 to 80 yards down the field. He had a little bit of mobility with his legs. Truly, Ryan Leaf looks like the potential was through the roof. So you had 2 quarterbacks. Who was going to go first? You knew one of them was going to go first overall. We didn't know how the rest of the draft was going to shake out. If you're looking for a running back, Curtis Enis, he is right there, man. He is the premier running back in this draft class, projected to go in the top 6 picks. But whatever team needs a running back, Curtis Enis is right there. He has some power, he has some strength behind him, had a little bit of speed behind him as well, man. This was the kid that you were looking for. If you were trying to hand the football off to him, 20-30 times a game, Curtis Enis was your guy out of Penn State, man. Of course, the consensus All-American, he was out. But on top of all of these players, the #1 player, according to Mel Kiper Jr. this season, was defensive end out of Florida State, Andre Wadsworth. And man, was this kid incredible, man. A walk-on at Florida State, earned the right to get a full ride scholarship while there. This kid did everything that you would want on the defense side of the football, man. He played defensive tackle, he played defensive end. He finished his last season with 16 sacks, 19 tackles for a loss. He was ACC Defensive Player of the Year, ACC Player of the Year, and once again, a consensus All-American. He was the #1 rated guy over Peyton Manning, over, of course, Charles Woodson, man. Andre Wadsworth was the guy, but where was he going to go? Now, looking at the draft board, like we just said, once again, you had the Indianapolis Colts. They had no idea who they wanted to go with, but they were going to, of course, take a quarterback. There was no questions asked. It's just going to come down to whether it's going to be Ryan Leaf or whether it's going to be Peyton Manning. And really, a lot of people were 50-50 at this time as to who they wanted or who they preferred out of the two. And the Colts, they want to make up their decision for quite some time.
We needed a quarterback, and we had an opportunity to really pick someone special, whether it was Ryan Leaf or Peyton Manning.
These are both very good athletes. They're both very big, young football players.
The scouts were split 50-50.
As we got even closer to the draft and the hype for these 2 quarterbacks started to grow even more and more, it was very clear for the San Diego Chargers that if they wanted a quarterback, which they desperately needed at this time, they were going to need to make a move. And that move was to trade up to get the #2 pick in that 98 draft with the Arizona Cardinals. And they paid a hefty price to move up from 3 to 2. They had to give up the 3rd overall pick to the Cardinals, as well as a 3rd round pick in that class, as well as a first-round draft pick in next year's draft with 2 players as well. So quite a price to pay to move up. But for San Diego, you have nothing to lose, right? You are going to get one of the premier quarterbacks. There are 2 of them on the board. Nobody knows who's truly going to be number 1. Nobody knows who's going to be picked. But it was okay with San Diego. They didn't care who Indianapolis decided to take. They thought they were not going to miss with whoever fell at number 2.
We were excited about either one. That was the beauty of it. We didn't think we could lose.
As for wide receivers, the number 1 wide receiver was clear. It was Randy Moss, but where was he going to go? Randy Moss dealing with a ton of off-the-field issues that raised quite a lot of question marks in the minds of general managers and owners across the NFL. He had top 10 talent, but what team was going to take that risk? We heard earlier that Dick Vermeil, maybe he was going to be interested, but he pretty much eliminated that from the jump.
Randy Moss is on our draft board right now, rated as a first-round pick. When we actually stack our board, then he won't be on the board.
With pick number 6 clearly out of the question now, you look at number 7, the New Orleans Saints sitting there looking for a wide receiver. Randy Moss is going to be there, and the Saints need a wide receiver at this time. But were they going to allow the off-the-field troubles to persuade them from picking Randy Moss with the 7th pick? Didn't really sound like it at first.
I don't think you can judge people on other people. I think that if the New Orleans Saints and Bill Carrick or Mike Ditka judges Randy Moss or anybody else in Randy's on Lawrence Phillips, you're doing a disservice to Randy Moss.
And then you had the Dallas Cowboys picking 8. They surely were not going to skip on Randy Moss, right? They had, a lot of talent. They were still holding on to their big 3, but obviously that ship like it was starting to sail. So you needed an epic playmaker. Randy Moss was that guy. He dominated over there at Marshall, right? Putting up 44 touchdowns in his collegiate career. He had the size, he had the speed, he could go up and make the plays. His only question mark was, is he going to be able to get off a press, and can he run routes? Those are the 2 biggest question marks surrounding Randy Moss. But you're looking at 7 or 8 as where Randy Moss is going to end up going in this draft. So heading into the draft, there really was no questions as to was there talent in this class. There were a ton of great players. The question was, where were players going to go? Because up until the minute that the Colts stepped up and made the pick, nobody truly knew who was going to go. The Colts kept this a great secret. Of course, towards the end, people started to put 2 and 2 together.
They need to make the right choice. He's not saying Boomer, but I can tell you this. In my gut, if I was playing poker with him, I think it's going to be Peyton Manning.
But you looked at everything, right? Up until literally the night of the draft, the Colts were still looking at film between Ryan Leaf and Peyton Manning. The Wonderlic scores, they were basically identical, right? With Ryan Leaf scoring a 27, Peyton Manning scoring a 28. You looked at the maturity issues potentially for Ryan Leaf, but that ceiling was so high, I think teams are going to overlook a lot of those maturity issues, which ended up being a big mistake now looking at it, but they overlooked it because he was that big body quarterback with that strong arm, man. And you've seen the magic he did at Washington State. You really can't lose in this draft, right? So of course, going up with the first overall pick, the Colts, they took our guy, man, Peyton Manning.
With the first pick in the draft, the Indianapolis Colts select quarterback, University of Tennessee, Peyton Manning.
Which left a no-brainer decision, of course, for the San Diego Chargers. They just spent all of their draft picks basically to move up all of that capital to go get a quarterback, and Ryan Leaf was actually the quarterback that they preferred of the 2, but he is sitting right there in number 2. He was already looking at places to live in San Diego, looking at oceanfront homes, man. So Ryan Leaf, he wanted to go to San Diego. Some members of the Chargers, they wanted Ryan Leaf. So they came in, they made the easy selection.
With the second choice in the draft, the San Diego Chargers select quarterback, Washington State University, Ryan Leaf.
And bam, just like that, the top 2 quarterbacks that everybody has been waiting to see where they would go, they were finally off the board. Manning, he's over there with the Colts. Leaf, he's over there with San Diego.
Everybody's happy. The Chargers say they got the quarterback they wanted, with no disrespect to Peyton Manning.
I think we're all very excited about this guy's potential. I think we just look at him and say that he's a little bit rawer than the other guy, but maybe if we can get everything to come into place for him, then maybe there is a greater growth potential.
But now the draft of the top remaining players, that can now begin, right? Because Charles Woodson is there, but Andre Wadsworth, the #1 overall player in the draft, he's on the board. Like I said, Curtis Enis is there as well. You had TAKEO Spikes, you had Keith Brooking, you had Randy Moss. How was this rest of this top 10 going to shake out on this night? Well, Andre Wadsworth, he's the #1 player on the board. The Cardinals feel like we got the #1 overall player at #3 because, of course, when teams need quarterbacks, they're going to overreach. They're going to go ahead and get those guys. We got the top guy at #3. So the Cardinals, they're selecting our guy Andre Wadsworth, man, at defensive end. Unfortunately for him, because of a lot of injuries, his career ended up being just about 3 seasons in the NFL. He did try to make a comeback in 2007. That did not play out very well. So somewhat of a dud pick now looking at it, but at the time, they thought they got themselves a playmaker at the defensive end position, which means Charles Woodson still available, and the Oakland Raiders, they did not hesitate to take their guy.
So now the Cats have got to think throw, and Woodson knows that, and he's got the pick.
So now with the 2 quarterbacks off the board, the 2 best defensive players off the board, the #1 running back is still on the board, Curtis Enis, and it looks like for the Chicago Bears, they have the next great running back. They had Walter Payton, and now you have Curtis Enis. They took him without hesitation, and of course, man, they are celebrating. They got a playmaker at the running back position, but we know how this story all plays out. Curtis Enis was not the next Walter Payton. He did not have the greatest career. He really didn't play that well. Of course, he had a degenerative knee. That injury ended his career way earlier than it should have been, and they never truly lived up to the hype. But that left one more great player on the board, Randy Moss. And where will he go? We know he's not going to go 6. So when the Rams, they step up, the Rams are going to go ahead and they're going to select somebody other than Randy Moss, of course.
First off, Randy Moss was off our board because you have to pick him in the first round. And I couldn't justify taking that kind of chance with that kind of money to my owners. I don't think it's a secure risk. I hope very much that he's successful, and I think he will be. I really do.
And they did just that. So the question was, what are the New Orleans Saints going to do? Is this where Randy Moss comes off the board? Nobody had any idea. So of course, we gotta wait for the commissioner to walk out and tell us who the Saints are going with.
With the 7th pick in the draft, the New Orleans Saints select tackle, San Diego State University, Kyle Turley.
So by shocking quite some people, Kyle Turley is the guy that they go with. Now, he had a pretty good year, ended up being a good career, ended up being a Pro Bowler, very solid offensive tackle, man, but it wasn't Randy Moss. But that meant he set the stage. America's team, he is going to go there. Randy Moss, that is exactly where he's going. But what we end up finding out later is that Jerry Jones and some of that staff was a little scared of Randy Moss because of the off-the-field issues. And that's crazy, right? The Cowboys scared of somebody with off-the-field issues? But that's exactly what happened, right? Michael Irvin scared them off because they had to deal with so much of the off-the-field issues with Michael Irvin that Randy Moss, they didn't want to deal with that again. They thought, Irving, man, we can't have another one. So we're going to go ahead and let Randy Moss slip. And once Randy Moss slipped past 8, it was just a slippery slope from there because every team figured if the Cowboys, if they're going to pass on them, we're not going to take them. So Randy Moss kept falling and falling and falling and falling and falling all the way to the 21st pick in the draft. A top 10 talent dropping to 21. We have seen this before, but Randy Moss, the only current Hall of Famer out of this draft class, dropped to 21, and as soon as he came in, he said he was going to tear the league up.
I'm gonna come here and try to do the best I can to rip the NFL up.
Randy Moss did just that. He is the only Hall of Famer currently out of here. We do know out of this great draft class, there are multiple potential Hall of Famers. You have Charles Woodson, you have Peyton Manning as guys that we think should ultimately be in the Hall of Fame. But this draft class did produce 35 Pro Bowlers. We'll go ahead and name them from the order in which they were drafted. Those Pro Bowlers were Peyton Manning, Charles Woodson, Kyle Turley, Greg Ellis, Fred Taylor, Trey Thomas, Keith Brooking, TAKEO Spikes, Randy Moss, Alan Faneca, Corey Chavis, Flozell Adams, Sam Cowart, Patrick Surtain, Samari Rolle, Steven Alexander, Jeremy Newberry, Olin Kreutz, Leonard Little, Jeremiah Trotter, Amon Green, Alan Rossum, Brian Greasy, Hines Ward, Lance Schulters, Ike Reese, Matt Burke, Fred Beasley, Matt Hasselbeck, Mike Wall, Jamal Williams, Jeff Saturday, Mike Vanderjagt, Phil Dawson, London Fletcher. So a crazy draft, a ton of crazy picks, man. And when you look back at it retrospectively now, like I said, quite a lot of misses, man. Charles Woodson, how do you judge that, right? You have a defensive guy who just won the Heisman, but is he all like hype, right? You don't really know how he's going to be able to translate because he's making plays in college. Will he make those same plays? Of course, Charles Woodson lived up to a lot of that hype, man. Obviously, you have Peyton Manning, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. You had Ryan Leaf, one of the biggest busts of all time. Those two were essentially neck and neck. And at the end of the day, the Indianapolis Colts, they made the correct decision. The Chargers, who decided, hey, as long as we're at number 2, it doesn't matter who we end up getting. Well, they ended up with my man Ryan Leaf, man. And they probably weren't so great on that. The number 1 overall pick, I don't know how much we could always trust Mel Kiper, man. Andre Wadsworth was not a terrible player. His body just ultimately didn't hold up for him very well. But you look back at it now, man. It wasn't the greatest pick at all. But Keith Brooking ended up being good. TAKEO Spikes ended up being a great pick. And then Randy Moss dropping. It's just funny when you end up looking at it, man. He could have been with the greatest show on turf with the Rams. The Rams end up passing on him because of character issues. Dick Vermeil was not having any of that, man. The Saints, you know, in the following year how they made that huge mistake. I'm not sure how Randy Moss would have fared over there in New Orleans. The Cowboys would have definitely been interesting, which is crazy because the Cowboys, of all teams, deciding to pass on Randy Moss. I don't know, man. It's absolutely crazy. And that's why Randy Moss had that 3-touchdown game against him, that revenge game, because Randy Moss was upset because we thought that was the landing spot for Randy Moss, man. But a very good draft class, you know, at the end of the day. A ton of talent, man. Like we said, Hines Ward in that draft class. Jeff Saturday wasn't even drafted in that draft class, man. A very talented one. Of course, as we go through the years and we have more of the advanced analytics and, you know, more just everything, social media to track some of these players, you can kind of see some red flags from guys, man. And Ryan Leaf had some red flags that the Chargers just simply overlooked because he had that strong arm. And we see teams now that will draft players because of the physical ability, not so much what they can do. And what we've learned is that often the best players aren't always the fastest, the strongest, or the tallest. There's a lot more that goes into football, man. And sometimes it's easy to fall in love with the measurables. And I think that's what we've seen with Ryan Leaf. When you had Peyton Manning, he's won in high school, he's won in college, his dad was an NFL player, so you don't know how many of those meetings he was sitting in as a kid. And all of a sudden you overthink things. And that's how Ryan Leaf ended up being the 2nd overall pick, and the Chargers had to pay a lot to even get to that pick to get Ryan Leaf, man. So crazy draft all in out, man. Obviously I was a kid, so I didn't know each of these drafts, how intricate it could be. Now, you know, in another 10 years, we could look back, you know, at the 2019 draft, 2018 draft, and we could see how everything turned out because you know how the careers of all these guys end up going, man. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, man, reliving the 1998 draft, go ahead and leave this a like, share it, man. Make sure it gets out to as many people as possible. And if you're new to the channel, you like these type of videos, please go ahead and subscribe, man. But that is all I have. It's your boy DLloyd. I'm gonna see y'all next time. Peace.
I hit record a drop, you can't ignore it. I'm transforming now these cars and planes, I'm always boarding. Just out touring down in Charlotte like I play for Hornets. When I'm